The bond between Mandy and me was not something that formed overnight. It developed over the course of years filled with shared challenges and successes. We both came from modest backgrounds, shaped by parents who valued hard work, dedication, and resilience. Mandy grew up in Kent, in a small home where her father ran a construction business and her mother worked as a school teacher. These humble beginnings instilled in her a deep sense of responsibility and a practical view of the world. As for me, I spent my childhood in Surrey, surrounded by the hustle and bustle of a growing suburb. My father, a commercial lawyer, was a significant influence in my life, teaching me the importance of discipline and ambition. My mother, the steady and nurturing figure, provided the emotional foundation for our family, ensuring that warmth and stability were constants at home. The lessons they taught me became the bedrock of my career in project management, a field that requires both strategic thinking and emotional intelligence. Mandy and I met at university, both pursuing degrees in business administration. While she excelled in long-term strategy and planning, I thrived in execution and problem-solving. Our complementary skills drew us together, and before long, our professional partnership blossomed into something personal. In the early days of our relationship, we spent many nights brainstorming business ideas and envisioning the future we wanted to build. It was during one of these sessions that the idea for Alpha Business Consultants, ABC, was born. With my father's guidance and financial backing, we launched our firm, focusing on strategic planning and organizational change. The early years were far from easy, balancing client demands, managing our expanding team, and navigating the trials of a new business. But through it all, Mandy and I supported each other, forging a partnership that we believed was unbreakable. Mandy spends a lot of time on the road, covering about 8,000 miles each year for client meetings. Our home, just off the busy M25 motorway in Surrey, offers a peaceful retreat from the chaos of London's traffic. Even though it's a charming place to live, navigating the M25 often turns a short trip into a time-consuming ordeal. To deal with the frustration of the traffic jams, Mandy has a simple trick: snacks, a soft drink, and tuning into her favorite bubblegum pop station. Her car of choice is a vibrant orange Volkswagen Beetle convertible, the latest model with a 2-liter engine, a premium sound system, black leather seats, and a soft black top. It's a fun little car, though it's often filled with empty drink bottles, candy wrappers, and other clutter. I find it amusing that she drives a car capable of reaching speeds over 120 miles per hour. Yet most of the time, she's either stuck in traffic or creeping through some of the busiest roads in the UK. Her first car was an old Volkswagen Beetle, long before we met, when she was still living with her parents. I never asked about it, but I imagine those fond memories of that old Beetle include intimate moments within its small confines. When Volkswagen reintroduced the Beetle a few years ago, Mandy couldn't stop talking about how much she wanted one. So for her 50th birthday, I took the hint and bought her the top-of-the-line convertible. I even splurged on a personalized license plate with her initials and the word bug on it. An absurd amount of money for a plate, but it made the car feel even more special. She affectionately named it the Baby Bug. Although she loves the car, Mandy doesn't always keep track of things like tire pressure or fluid levels, so I made sure to check them regularly. Some people don't mind clutter in their car, but I can't stand it. So, I often cleaned out empty cups, wrappers, and other junk. I never mentioned it to her, and she probably didn't notice. She never thanked me, but that didn't matter. Each time I cleaned out the car, I'd find enough loose change to grab a couple of beers at the pub later. It's not surprising that Mandy doesn't always keep track of things like loose change, given that both of us have decent incomes and a comfortable lifestyle. Mandy works as a business consultant, helping companies devise strategies for growth, while I'm a freelance project manager specializing in change management. Most people call me Terry, even though my real name is Dave. Not Terrence, but everyone, including Mandy, calls me Terry. It's short for Terminator, a nickname I earned because of my work, which often involves firing people during organizational changes. Mandy and I met at university, where we were both studying business administration. We hit it off so well that, before we even got married, we decided to start our own company, Alpha Business Consultants Limited. We were young and admittedly a bit naive, but we had some valuable advice and financial support from my father, a well-respected commercial lawyer. Unfortunately, my father passed away a few years after we launched the business. He had agreed to serve as a director of the company, which helped establish our credibility when negotiating with potential clients. In return, we gave him a few shares in the company, and he generously offered his legal expertise whenever we needed it. In the early days, Mandy and I worked tirelessly to build the business, focusing on helping companies with strategic planning. However, after a while, we realized that our skills were complementary but distinct. Mandy excelled in planning for the future of businesses, while my strength lay in solving problems when things went awry. She was skilled in the what should happen, while I was more adept at handling the what happens when it doesn't. Both Mandy and my father felt that alpha business consultants should prioritize strategy over execution. So, we came to an agreement that I would branch out and work independently as a consultant specializing in organizational change projects, while Mandy would continue to run the company. Mandy continued to lead ABC on her own, while I ventured into my own consulting work. Our twin daughters, Linda and Lucy, had both left home a few years ago to attend university. When they were younger, I had converted a room on the ground floor of our house into an office for the business with a sign on the door. It was a quiet space for either of us to work without interruption. Over time, however, it became Mandy's office, as I spent most of my time working directly with clients, while she preferred to work from home. Mandy had around 50 regular clients and charged fees as needed when they requested her consulting services. In contrast, my work wasn't always as consistent. I was often referred to projects and worked as an assistant for a large management consultancy firm. I typically only had one client at a time, working with them over the course of weeks or months on large-scale projects like office relocations or corporate restructuring. Once I finished a project, I usually took some time off, sometimes just a few days, sometimes several weeks before the next assignment came in. Not knowing what would come next could be intimidating for some people, but I became accustomed to it and even found the breaks enjoyable. I used the free time to read more or hone my cooking skills. It also gave me the chance to handle household maintenance tasks that didn't require professional help, like cleaning Mandy's fish tank. Mandy had read somewhere that having a large aquarium filled with brightly colored fish could help with her thinking, so she insisted on having one. She loved the idea, but never quite kept up with the maintenance. To her, pH was just a pair of random letters. As a result, I ended up being the one to care for the fish. I never minded being alone when Mandy was away on business trips, and she never complained when I was away for a week on a project. In fact, I think our relationship benefited from these occasional separations, especially after the girls left home. I had hoped that with the house to ourselves, we would be able to liven up our social life, perhaps even take romantic weekends to places like Paris or Rome. But, as the saying goes, people make plans and the gods laugh. Things took an unexpected turn one day when Mandy came home with little Doug, a Shih Tzu, also known as a Chinese lion dog. Every time I see him, I think of the old joke about a zoo with only one animal, a dog, and it's a Shih Tzu. At first, I was a little frustrated that Mandy had brought a dog into the house without consulting me. Little Doug was sweet enough, but I immediately knew I'd end up being the one to walk him and take care of him, whether Mandy was busy or not. When Mandy first got little Doug, he was just a tiny puppy and needed house training. Guess who was assigned that job? It wasn't called Little Doug just because of his size. For a while, he marked his territory all over the house. Mandy, however, absolutely adored him. He became her dog, always perched on her lap, petted endlessly while she watched TV, and even lounging beside her on the sofa. He'd park himself on the chair next to her at the dinner table, and every morning, he'd be snuggled up in our bed. I tried to convince Mandy that little Doug shouldn't be allowed to roam freely through the house, but she didn't seem to hear me. To maintain any sense of privacy, I had to lock the bedroom door if I wanted some peace and quiet. Even then, I had to remember to unlock it afterward, or little Doug would start barking at me from behind the door. Mandy, from inside, would join in, howling at me to stop. One Sunday afternoon, as I was cleaning up, I noticed a receipt on the floor next to a plastic bag. It was from the Ainsley House Hotel, a large country hotel about 20 miles away. The hotel was known for its restaurant, but its main business came from its spa and conference center, hosting seminars, weddings, and corporate events. The receipt didn't provide much detail, but the amount seemed like the kind you'd expect for lunch or dinner for 2 or 3 people. I assumed Mandy had taken some clients there, so I decided not to throw it away in case she needed it later. I slipped it into my wallet to give back to her. After tidying up the snack wrappers and junk, I tied the bag and threw it out, then took the Beetle to the garage for gas and a quick checkup. The next day, Mandy was heading out on a business trip up north and wouldn't be back for a few days. I had a few days of downtime between projects and had hoped to take her out for lunch at the Fox and Hounds pub, but she said she was too busy preparing for the trip. I was a little disappointed, as Sundays had always been family days for us, and our daughter still carried on that tradition by calling every Sunday. When I returned from the garage, I found Mandy in the living room, phone in hand, clearly in the middle of a long conversation with Lucy. I could hear the tail end of it and realized Lucy was going through another crisis. Linda was always the calm one, steady and laid back, while Lucy had a tendency to make things more dramatic. When they had relationship problems, I tried to remain calm, offering support but not getting too involved. They both knew they could come to us for advice, but for the emotional stuff like crying or gossiping, it was usually Mandy they turned to first. From what I overheard, Mandy was telling Lucy to let go of the situation, move on, and not dwell on things. There were plenty of fish in the sea, she was saying, and advising Lucy to focus on her life before rushing into anything new. I didn't know the details of what had happened between Lucy and her boyfriend, so I wasn't sure what kind of advice to offer. Personally, I always believed in the Latin phrase festina lente, meaning hurry up slowly, suggesting that you should take your time to think things through before acting. But I knew Lucy would have to make the decision herself, so I just asked Mandy to say hi to Lucy for me and went into the kitchen to prepare Sunday dinner. We usually had roast beef with Yorkshire puddings and fries on Sundays, and I found it relaxing to put it all together, especially with a good bottle of claret to wash it down. At dinner, Mandy was in the mood to chat, but she did share what had been going on with Lucy and Linda. Linda was doing well in her relationship and acing her schoolwork, while Lucy's situation was more complicated. Her boyfriend had dumped her after catching her kissing someone else. I commented that maybe the boyfriend would come around if given some time, but I wasn't optimistic about any reconciliation if Lucy started looking for other options. Mandy, on the other hand, thought Lucy should just forget the whole relationship and look for fun elsewhere. After dinner, I took little Doug for his evening walk. Once I made sure the little black bag with his poop was tightly sealed, I tossed it in the trash can outside. Later, I settled in front of the TV, while Mandy retreated to her office to work on a presentation for a client. I loaded the dishwasher and eventually went to bed, but I had a hard time falling asleep. I was aware that Mandy had stayed up later than me, but when I woke up in the morning, I wasn't greeted by my wife. Instead, I was met with little Doug's foul-smelling dog breath in my face. Nothing quite wakes you up like the foul stench of a zoo's morning breath. I quickly threw on some clothes, took little Doug out for his morning bathroom break, and then joined Mandy in the kitchen. Mornings were never our strongest suit, and Mandy needed at least a couple of espressos before she could truly function. We exchanged a bit of small talk about the weather while waiting for the chaos of rush hour on the M25 to subside. After a brief kiss on the cheek, she petted little Doug and hopped into the Beetle, heading out for the day. It wasn't until she left that I remembered the receipt in my wallet and decided to leave it on her desk when I had the chance. That's when I noticed the time on the receipt, 10:18 a.m. The amount seemed to match what you'd expect for a night stay. But why? Why had she needed a hotel when she just left for a business trip north? I figured I'd ask her about it later, assuming there was a simple explanation. With a bit of free time on my hands, I decided to check my calendar to see where I was supposed to be that week. It turned out I was out of town, but Mandy had planned to be away for a few nights. The receipt was from the morning after she left, so it seemed she had only made it 20 miles before booking a night at the Ainsley House Hotel. It struck me as odd. If it were a business event, there would be no need for a hotel room. I could have driven her back home or picked her up later. I sat in her office, staring at the receipt. Nothing had seemed out of the ordinary lately, and we were still intimate regularly. So, why the hotel? Was this evidence of something more? I had no reason to suspect she was seeing anyone else, but now I couldn't shake the idea that maybe I was missing something. Why would she need a hotel room when I was off and away for work? Could she be doing both? staying at a hotel and seeing someone else? Or was there a simple explanation I wasn't seeing? I grabbed my phone and called the hotel number printed on the receipt, hoping to get some clarity. A woman answered the phone. I asked if she could put me through to Mrs. Amanda Carmichael. "I'm sorry, sir," she said, "but Mrs. Carmichael hasn't checked in yet." I felt a brief sense of relief, but then she added, "Check-in isn't until noon, and it's only 10:30 now. Would you like me to leave a message for her?" I thought about leaving a message like, "Your husband called to check up on you," but I realized that probably wouldn't get me any closer to the truth. So I politely declined and made myself another cup of coffee. I didn't want to overthink things, but I also didn't want to sit around waiting for an explanation that might never come. I decided I needed to take action. Maybe there was a perfectly innocent explanation, or maybe there was more to it than I was seeing. Either way, I couldn't stay in the dark. After putting little Doug outside and making sure he had a spot in the garden, I drove to Ainsley House Hotel. It was nearly noon when I arrived, and the first thing I noticed was the little Beetle parked in the lot. So, Mandy had already checked in. I parked a few rows away and dialed her number. She picked up immediately. "Hey Terry, how's it going?" Mandy asked. "I heard there was a major accident on the M25, and I wanted to make sure you're okay." I answered as calmly as I could. "Traffic's been a bit slow, but I didn't hear about any accident." "It's on the M25, you probably missed it," she said. "Oh, I'm just passing Watford. Thanks for checking in," I replied. "Okay, call me when you get there," Mandy said before hanging up. I hung up, feeling unsettled. Was she just trying to cover her tracks? Or was this all just an innocent misunderstanding? I decided to walk through the hotel and see if I could spot her. If I didn't find her in the public areas, I'd call her room directly and ask to meet her there. As I crossed the lobby, I noticed a bulletin board listing the day's events. Monday appeared to be a quiet day for the hotel, with only one private event scheduled in the spa and fitness center at 7 p.m. My curiosity was piqued. What kind of private event could be taking place at a spa? Was it some sort of exclusive, clothing-optional gathering? Maybe Mandy had gotten involved in something like that. I walked over to the receptionist to ask about the event, but she seemed taken aback by the question and politely informed me that she couldn't provide any details. Essentially, it wasn't any of my business. Thinking I might have better luck elsewhere, I wandered over to the lobby bar and ordered a coffee. As I casually inquired about the private party at the spa, the waiter leaned in and gave me a knowing look. "Yeah, you could say it's a group of nudists," he said, "but that's not all. It's actually a pretty well-known regular event here." My eyebrows shot up. "Really?" I managed to say, although my stomach had already begun to churn. "And what's the deal with it?" I asked. He shrugged nonchalantly. "If you want to know more, just look up the Bottoms Up Club online. It's no secret around here." I sat there, stunned, processing what he'd just told me. This wasn't the direction I'd expected things to go in, but it was quickly becoming clear that there was a lot I didn't know. I took a quick gulp of my coffee and pulled out my phone to connect to the hotel's Wi-Fi. Finding the Bottoms Up Club was straightforward. Their website revealed that membership cost £20 annually, and to attend their events, you needed to sign up and agree to the club's terms. The Mellow Monday Mix and Pick event, priced at £49 for single men, was held at the spa of a nearby hotel, starting at 7 p.m. The site also outlined the dress code, which included optional masks. At this point, I was almost certain that Mandy was at the hotel for this event. She seemed like the type to enjoy herself in a setting like that. I had to find out what was really going on. As much as I didn't want to see my wife involved with strangers, I needed undeniable proof of her actions, whether for a potential divorce or just for my own peace of mind. Sitting in the lobby, waiting for her to reveal herself, wasn't going to cut it. I finished my coffee and left the hotel. I dialed the club's number and spoke to another pleasant woman who walked me through the event details. She confirmed that I would need to bring an ID to enter, reassured me that my personal information would remain private, and mentioned that I could purchase rubbers and masks on site. The club's name wouldn't appear on any transaction records. Only SJB services would show up. When I got home, I checked in on little Doug before changing into something more suitable for the evening. I still wasn't entirely sure what I was dealing with, so I took a moment to review our finances online. Sure enough, there had been payments made to SJB services over the past year. These payments seemed to align with Mandy's memberships and events she'd attended. I printed out the bank statements for later reference. Later that evening, around 8 p.m., I returned to the hotel and made my way to the spa. At the reception, an attractive middle-aged woman in a floral dress greeted me. She was the same person I had spoken to earlier. After checking my ID, she sold me a mask and some rubbers. Though I had no intention of using them, I had to play along. The receptionist seemed to notice my unease and attempted to reassure me. "Just head to the gym," she said with a smile. "You're a bit late, so you might have to wait, but everyone's really friendly. If you need anything, just ask. You'll fit right in." I slipped on the mask and walked through the door into the gym. The lighting was soft and dim. The heat turned up to create an intimate atmosphere. The gentle sounds of jazz played in the background, just loud enough to maintain a relaxed conversation without disrupting the mood. Inside, the gym was packed with about 70 or 80 people. Some were fully dressed, others partially or completely undressed. A table with refreshments sat near the entrance, but the real activity seemed to be happening around the mats scattered across the room. 8 large white sheets were laid out, each surrounded by different groups, couples, singles, and others, some masked, some not. I felt out of place in my full attire, but I knew I had to stay this way if I was going to gather the evidence I needed. I moved closer to one group, watching as 2 young women explored each other's bodies, the crowd around them murmuring their approval. In another group, 2 older couples, their bodies jiggling as they fumbled with each other, created the awkward impression of a bizarre wrestling match. But then I saw her, Mandy. She was in the far corner, lying naked on a mat, tangled up with 2 young men. Her face was unmistakable, even without a mask. From across the room, I could spot the small turtle tattoo on her left ankle. She was fully engaged, and the group around her seemed to be encouraging her. I didn't want to confront her. I couldn't give myself away. So I stayed silent and focused on capturing the moment. Although I had signed a confidentiality agreement to attend the event, that wasn't going to stop me from getting the proof I needed. Mandy's face was visible enough that I could blur out the others later when editing the video. A man in a black shirt, standing next to me, whispered under his breath. "This is like watching a door get kicked in during a storm," he said, nodding toward Mandy. "Look at how she's moving." A woman nearby, who seemed to know more than I would have liked, added, "She's great with a few guys at once." We've been with her a couple of times. I could feel my stomach twist, but I forced myself to push the feeling aside. I kept my focus sharp, recording everything discreetly on my phone. I knew I had the proof, both in the video and from the casual comments that were circulating about Mandy. I'd seen enough. I couldn't stay any longer, and I wasn't about to watch the scene unfold any further. The receptionist seemed surprised to see me leaving so soon, but I quickly made up an excuse. I said I had forgotten something and promised I'd be back. As I walked out, my mind was spinning. What I had just witnessed was enough to destroy everything. Mandy, the woman I trusted, was involved in something completely alien to me. Part of me, the part that still clung to hope, tried to rationalize what I had seen, but deep down, I knew the truth. I knew what she was doing. The bond we once shared felt meaningless now. I was still in shock, but as I drove away from the hotel, my body and mind began to process the reality of what I had just witnessed. A wave of nausea hit me, my stomach churned, and bile rose in my throat as though I had food poisoning. Along with that physical reaction, a profound sadness gripped me, so deep that I had to sit in the car for several minutes before I could even think about heading home. As time passed, I began to build a mental wall around my grief and anger. It wasn't any easier just because I understood how to manage these emotional shifts. I wasn't going to deny reality. I had seen it with my own eyes. She had been with other people. Anger bubbled up within me, but I also knew that I had to face the inevitable changes that lay ahead. Grief and anger would accompany me for a while, but I was determined to act. I couldn't afford to waste time wallowing in confusion over the cause and effect of what had happened. By the time I got home, I was already thinking about my next steps. I couldn't control what had occurred, but I could control how I responded. I was going to face these changes head on, and I wouldn't let them overwhelm me. I would take charge, not simply let myself be dragged along by circumstances. I wanted to be proactive, not passive. That night, I took little Doug for a quick walk before trying to numb the pain with a couple of drinks. I didn't sleep well and woke up feeling terrible the next day, but I knew I had to keep moving. Little Doug and I were headed to Cornwall. I'd always thought of it as the toe of England, the furthest point southwest, gazing out at the vast Atlantic Ocean. These days, much of Cornwall had become a quiet retreat for wealthy retirees who had bought up the cottages once owned by local fishermen. The fishermen had long since gone, replaced by elderly couples like Mr. and Mrs. Beach, who spent their days walking their dogs and enjoying the countryside. I thought about taking little Doug to Belgium, but without a chip and a pet passport, it wasn't an option. For once, I was glad he didn't have a microchip. He couldn't be tracked. And in the end, Cornwall was a lot farther than Brussels anyway. The drive to Newquay took over 5 hours, with a brief stop to let little Doug stretch his legs. I dropped him off at the animal shelter there, telling the receptionist that I'd found him wandering the streets of Newquay. She immediately recognized him as a Shih Tzu and assured me that he'd find a home quickly, especially with his cute size. I left, relieved that he didn't seem upset or whiny, just a little confused as we said our goodbyes. Afterward, I decided to find a quiet pub. The man behind the counter at a gas station recommended the White Horse. It took me a moment to realize he meant the nearby White Horse Hotel. I ended up sitting at a corner table with a ploughman's lunch and a pint of good ale. As I ate, I checked my phone and called Jim Savage, a senior partner at a management consultancy in Surrey. Jim and I had known each other for years. He had been a rival ever since Mandy and I started our business, ABC. Jim was a charming guy, but a bit of a wolf in sheep's clothing. When we first started ABC, he had offered us a cushy job to close down our business and come work for him, fully knowing that he'd likely let us go when it suited him. We'd always turned him down, but we kept in touch, meeting from time to time at business events. Jim always seemed genuinely interested in what I had to say, even though I knew it was part of his strategy to neutralize us. Despite the urgency of my situation, Jim agreed to meet the next day. When I finally got home to Surrey that evening, I was drained. I had planned to call Mandy to tell her about little Doug, but just as I was about to dial her number, my phone rang. "Hi, Mandy," I answered. "I was just about to call you," I continued. "I have bad news. Little Doug somehow got out of the garden and was hit by a truck." There was a long silence on the other end before she gasped. "What? Is he okay?" I kept my voice steady. "I'm afraid he's gone. A passerby saw him slip under the gate and run into the road, but the truck driver didn't stop. The truck ran over him, and there was nothing I could do. I buried him in the garden," I added. Mandy sobbed uncontrollably on the phone, muttering how devastated she was. I couldn't help but feel a dark satisfaction. Honestly, there was a part of me that had considered ending little Doug's life myself, but I couldn't bring myself to go that far. He wasn't a wild animal. He was just a dog. What gave me peace was the fact that little Doug wasn't dead at all. He was safe and sound in Cornwall, far from Mandy's knowledge. I expressed my condolences, even suggesting that I could buy a small headstone for his grave. That pushed Mandy into another round of tears. We ended the call, and I knew she would cry for hours, mourning the loss of her beloved little Doug. As I sat back, I felt a bitter sense of relief. At least I had some control over the situation. My meeting with Jim Savage had gone smoothly. After I outlined what I needed, he seemed confident that his company would accept the terms I had proposed. He assured me that they'd have a corporate lawyer draft an agreement for my review as soon as possible. On my way home, I stopped by a local real estate office to get an estimate of our house's market value. The figure they gave me was impressive, much higher than I had anticipated. Mandy and I had previously talked about our retirement plans, agreeing to keep the house and rent it out. We'd even run the idea by our daughters, and they had been on board as long as we didn't sell. But now, with everything that had happened, I realized I needed to change my approach. I didn't bother calling Mandy that night, even though I knew she'd be waiting for an update on how she was handling little Doug's, and I thought about it. But I wasn't in the mood to be sympathetic. She could deal with it on her own, and I figured she'd be back the next day. She had said she was near Manchester, but who really knows? I didn't care where she was. What mattered was that for the first time in a while, I slept a little better that night. Perhaps it was petty, but I felt a strange sense of satisfaction from the situation. The next morning, I briefly wondered where little Doug had gone. But then it hit me he was gone. I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. I didn't have to feed him, walk him, or pick up after him anymore. That brief sense of relief, however, quickly faded as the realization of bigger problems set in. In England, divorce lawyers are referred to as family solicitors, specializing in divorce and other family-related matters. There were plenty of them to choose from, and honestly, they all seemed quite similar. I didn't need one locally, so I made an appointment with a family solicitor in Dorking. The name of the town amused me, and it wasn't far from where I was. I had time to take care of some things before the meeting, so I spent the afternoon browsing personalized license plates online, visiting a jewelry store, and picking up some groceries. I also took a few calls from business associates. By the time I arrived at the law office, I was feeling somewhat frazzled. Never in my wildest dreams did I think I'd be sitting in a solicitor's office discussing divorce. The secretary, noticing my tension, offered me coffee and tried to calm me down while I waited. The solicitor who eventually saw me was another middle-aged woman. She listened carefully to my story, but also advised me not to rush into anything. For a moment, I wondered if she was trying to delay things to rack up more fees, but I quickly dismissed the thought. In my experience, lawyers are rarely in a hurry to finish matters. They prefer to keep those billable hours rolling in. I mentioned that the divorce petition could always be withdrawn later if necessary, though I had no intention of doing so. After discussing my options, we decided to proceed with filing for divorce on the grounds of Mandy's infidelity. When Mandy came home that evening, I had already decided I wasn't going to cook for her. Instead, I made a spicy beef curry, one of my favorite dishes which I knew she hated. It worked out perfectly for me. I also took the opportunity to crack open a few bottles of my favorite Scottish craft beer. Over dinner, I casually mentioned the new contract I had secured while she was away. I told her I'd be working in Yorkshire for a while, but she didn't seem particularly interested. She was still upset about little Doug. When I told her I'd be leaving for Yorkshire the next morning and wouldn't be back until late Saturday night, she seemed disappointed. I didn't want to appear completely heartless, so after dinner, I hugged her and we sat down to watch TV together. She cried quietly over little Doug, and I sat beside her, my beer breath mingling with the curry smells. My time in Yorkshire proved to be very productive. The deal had already been finalized over the phone, and all the paperwork was ready for signing. I knew several of the directors involved, and they were thrilled when I accepted the initial 6-month assignment with the possibility of a permanent position. They also agreed to cover the costs of my move, 2 weeks of temporary accommodation, and half the rental costs for a place in Yorkshire. Everything was arranged so I could start immediately. Now it was time to distance myself from Mandy even further. After checking into my hotel that evening, I was looking forward to enjoying a pint or two of local ale. I didn't want to waste time on the phone with Mandy, but, of course, she rang anyway. She had found out that the fish in our tank had died earlier in the afternoon, and she was trying to break the news to me as gently as possible. She had no idea that I was the one who had stopped feeding them. I had simply stopped caring. "I'm so sorry, especially after everything with little Doug," she said. "I tried to do what I could, but I couldn't save them." "It's too late now, Mandy," I replied. "Just leave the tank. I'll clean it when I get back tomorrow." Saturday was just a brief stopover at home. I had returned early in the morning, but was planning to leave for Yorkshire again on Sunday. There was a long list of things I needed to do, including sorting through some paperwork while Mandy went shopping and made dinner. It kept her distracted. We spent a quiet evening in front of the TV, sipping on a couple of glasses of wine. Neither of us was in the mood for any closeness. We were both exhausted. To my surprise, I slept soundly that night. When I woke up, the heavy feeling that had been hanging over me seemed to have lifted. It was as though my mind had adjusted to the new reality. The alienation and despair were beginning to fade, replaced by a quiet determination to push forward and focus on what I could control. Though a deep emptiness still lingered, I knew I wasn't lost in grief anymore. I had regained control by focusing on the immediate tasks ahead of me. After lunch, I packed my car, kissed Mandy goodbye, and drove off to Yorkshire. A few days later, when she was served with the divorce papers, she had no idea it was coming. I knew exactly when it would happen, and I made sure my phone was off that day. It wasn't that I was trying to be cruel. I was simply busy. Still, There was a part of me that felt a strange sense of satisfaction in knowing I had a few hours of peace without her calls. After work, I returned to my hotel room, turned my phone back on, and checked my messages and voicemail. The main theme was clear. She was upset, confused, and angry. Without hesitation, I called her back. "What the hell is going on, Terry?" she asked, cutting straight to the point. "That's exactly what I've been asking myself, Mandy," I replied. "But this all started about a week ago. I don't understand what you're doing, but it needs to stop. This has gone way beyond a joke," she said. "It's almost like you're reading from my script, Mandy," I answered. "What do you mean by that?" she asked, sounding confused. "Well, at some point, I started wondering what was going on with you," I told her. "But now it's too late to stop, and this has definitely gone beyond a joke." "Are you talking about Ainsley House Hotel and the Bottoms Up Club?" she asked, her voice trembling. There was a long pause, followed by a heavy sigh. "I'm sorry, Terry," she said. "I really don't know what to say. I never thought you'd find out." "Well, Mandy, what you don't know can't hurt you, right?" I said. "Well, now I know," she replied, her voice low. "I know, and it hurts," I said. "We need to talk about this, but it's something we can't do over the phone." "Will you come home on Friday?" she asked. "I don't think talking will help much," I replied. I told Mandy I'd be home Saturday, but I needed to be back in Yorkshire by Sunday evening. When I returned Saturday afternoon, she seemed nervous. I didn't unpack my things. I wasn't sure how the situation would unfold. I planned to sleep in one of the guest rooms, keeping the option to leave if things became too tense. In situations like this, Brits tend to brew tea and hope things settle down. Soon enough, Mandy sat me down in the living room with a cup of tea, and I waited for her to speak. "First of all, I have to admit that this whole mess is my fault," she began. I didn't respond. "The truth is, I gave into temptation," she continued. "I stumbled across the Bottoms Up Club by accident, and I couldn't stop thinking about it. You weren't home when I first went, and I was really nervous. I even wore a masquerade mask because I thought no one would recognize me. I thought I could just observe, watch people perform, and see the show." I let her keep talking. "At first, it was just as I imagined," she said. "But then people started approaching me, and I couldn't resist. It didn't take long before I joined in. It was scary at first, but after the first time, I realized that these people were some of the most genuine, kind, and safe people I'd ever met. That's another reason I kept going back. I started to enjoy it. I like watching others have sex, and I like being watched when I'm having sex. Part of it is that sex with other people can just be fun. It doesn't have to mean anything serious." She looked at me, waiting for my reaction. "I agree, Mandy," I said after a pause. "Sex with other people can be fun." She smiled, clearly relieved. "As far as I'm concerned," I added, "as long as everyone's consenting, you can do whatever you want. No one should judge that." I sipped my tea, and her smile quickly faded. I wanted to see how she would react. She seemed to expect my response. She had a plan, and she was going to follow through. She admitted she'd made a mistake, but didn't seem to feel regret or remorse. It was clear she wasn't planning to stop. "What I did with other men didn't change how I feel about you, Terry," she said. "I love you, and our life together is amazing. I just hope you can understand that having fun with other men in a safe space doesn't threaten what we have. If you're not into it, just ignore it. If you're not around, you won't even know." "I think you're mistaken, Mandy," I said. "And honestly, I've already seen more than enough to ignore." "What do you mean by that?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I know about the payments to the hotel and the club," I said flatly. "Are you saying you saw me there?" she asked, almost incredulous. I locked eyes with her. "A couple of weeks ago, I saw you at the club around 8 p.m., I said. "You were with two young guys. Some people mentioned that you enjoy having sex in public." "Oh my God," she gasped, horrified. "I'm so sorry. I can't believe you saw me. I didn't think you'd ever find out. But please understand it was always just physical. It was an exciting adventure for me. That's all it ever was. I don't love anyone else, and I never wanted to. Looking back, I should have talked to you about it. But I wasn't sure how to tell you." "Well, Mandy, you're right about that," I said, my voice cold. "I wouldn't have been happy if you told me. Maybe it was more exciting for you, because you were hiding it from me. I know you're hurt, and I understand why," she said, her voice soft. "But Terry, Don't you think filing for divorce is a bit extreme? I don't think it's extreme. Not with everything you've done, I replied. You decided to betray me. You chose to give yourself to others, and I can't accept that. I want a divorce. Her shoulders slumped as she let out a deep sigh. Can we at least think about what this will mean for everyone before we take this step? She asked. I just think we shouldn't rush into it without considering the consequences. I'm already thinking about the consequences, I said. We can take some time to think it through, but I don't expect my mind to change. I left Mandy to process things on her own and headed to the Fox and Hounds for a drink. I've always had a soft spot for pubs, but there was something about this one that never felt quite right. Despite living in the area for years, I wasn't going to miss it. The regulars were a mix of pretentious middle-aged professionals who made me feel like I didn't belong. If I had the option, I'd choose a pint of Yorkshire ale over any watery southern beer. I sipped on my tepid, lackluster pint and began thinking through my next move. When I returned, Mandy had already started preparing dinner. I didn't bother unpacking. Instead, I dropped my bag in the guest room and grabbed a few things I needed from the master bedroom. At dinner, the conversation revolved around our daughters. Apparently, Lucy had taken Mandy's advice and was now actively looking for someone to replace her ex-boyfriend, who had, much to Lucy's frustration, moved on with her best friend. I had no idea what a BFF was, so I asked. Mandy explained it was short for best friend forever. I had my doubts about how long that friendship would last. I always thought of you as my best friend, I said. Mandy could tell I was distant, though I wasn't being rude about it. She didn't fully realize just how much had shifted between us. Maybe she assumed that our earlier conversation had somehow worked out a truce. I wasn't about to correct her. Sunday morning came, and I was up early. I made some toast and coffee, packed my bags, and headed out to Yorkshire. Before leaving, I double-checked the car to make sure I hadn't left anything belonging to Mandy, including a few business files I found tucked in the back seat. I had just passed Watford when my phone rang. Where are you? Mandy asked. Did you take the Beetle to the garage? No, I replied. I grabbed the little bug and am heading back to Yorkshire. I don't get it, she said. Why didn't you say goodbye? And why take the little bug? I just felt like it, I answered. You were still asleep? There was a pause as she processed what I'd said. I don't understand, she finally said. What am I supposed to do without the Beetle? You've got other cars, I replied. Well, the one I usually drive. I'm sure you'll manage, I said. Just be careful and don't mess up the bug. By the next day, I had bought a red Mazda MX-5 convertible from a dealership in Yorkshire, using the Beetle as a partial trade-in, but keeping the personalized plates. I had all the paperwork sorted and even posted an ad for the plates online. Mandy wasn't happy when she found out. A week later, she called furious. How am I supposed to get my car back? She demanded. I sold it, I told her flatly. What do you mean you sold it? She shouted. That's my car, she exclaimed. Actually, I said, it's mine. My name's on the registration. This isn't fair, Terry. Maybe not, I replied, but you could say I gave it to you. And taking it back? Not much different from what you did to me. Don't be petty, Terry, she snapped. It's not the same. You're being ridiculous. Fine, I understand what you mean. If you stop this nonsense and come home, we can work things out. I didn't respond right away. I'll come back to you when I'm ready, I said. For the next week, Mandy called me every day, asking me to return to Surrey to talk things through and sort everything out. The conversation was always the same, until the day she found out I had sold my shares in ABC. How could you make such a decision on your own? She screamed. I'm the second shareholder. You should have consulted me. Fair questions, I replied calmly. I get that you're angry, and I know my decision affects you. But I didn't need to ask you about selling my shares. Just like you didn't ask me before you decided to sleep with other men. I get why you're upset, I continued. But what's done is done. You'll have to accept it. You're a fool, she muttered. A few days later, she called me again, absolutely livid. The realization hit her like a ton of bricks. When we started the company, we each owned 50% of the shares, she said, the panic clear in her voice. What she didn't know was that I had inherited my father's shares, which increased my stake to 51%. This shift meant that the company's new majority owners froze our accounts and moved forward with a takeover. Mandy called furious and panicking. "Do you realize what you've done? ABC had over 200,000 in the bank. Now we've lost control of it. You've ruined our future." "Sorry, Mandy," I said, cutting her off. "But at least you still have your job." There was a sharp intake of breath, followed by silence. Then, I heard her sobbing uncontrollably before the call was cut off. I think she eventually realized that the deal I made with Jim Savage was about more than just the money. In exchange for 51% of the shares, I secured twice the average turnover from the past 5 years, plus the equivalent of the company's cash reserves. Jim also offered to keep Mandy on as a consultant for at least 2 more years, with a decent salary and performance-based bonuses. Jim wasn't an idiot. He knew it was a smart move to keep Mandy as the face of ABC, even if our personal lives were falling apart. During the divorce, the sale of our home became a major complication. In England, the process of buying and selling property is far from straightforward. Transactions are often linked in a chain, meaning one sale depends on others being finalized first. The highest bid is rarely the final one either. Sometimes, a new buyer swoops in with a higher offer just after the official closing date. That's exactly what happened to us. Our top bid was contingent on other deals. While it seemed promising, a better, unconditional offer came in the very next day. Accepting that offer was a relief for both of us, and I think Mandy was glad to see the sale go through without further delays. At this point, Mandy had fully come to terms with the fact that our marriage was over. The property was transferred to a company called Max Payne Associates, though I made sure the real buyer's identity remained a mystery. I considered it a smart investment. The house was in a great location, and I planned to rent it out to generate passive income. Now living and working as a management consultant in Yorkshire, I hadn't spoken to Mandy in a while until she called, asking if I had seen her wedding dress. Our daughter Linda and her fiancé were preparing to marry, and Mandy hoped Linda would wear the same dress she had worn years ago. She was convinced that somehow the dress had been packed with my belongings when we separated. "Sorry, Mandy," I said. "I have no idea where it is. I always try to be honest. Actually, I took the dress and sold it to a woman in Yorkshire who owns a boutique. I couldn't let my wife keep it after everything that happened, and I definitely wasn't going to let one of our daughters wear it. That dress was a symbol of a marriage that had ended, and I wasn't about to let them walk down the aisle in it." A few days later, Lucy called frantic. "Mom's going crazy, Dad," she said. "She found out that the diamond ring you gave her is fake. She thought it was worth a fortune, and now she's devastated." "Oh, that's awful," I replied flatly. "I bet she never would have known if she hadn't looked. People put so much value on things, and it hits them hard when they realize those things aren't what they thought." Lucy wasn't done. "Well, the real ring is locked up in a safety deposit box at my bank. Who knows? It might come in handy if I ever find someone special." As I settled into my new life in Yorkshire, I often reflected on how much had changed. The days of planning with Mandy, dreaming of a shared future, seemed like distant memories. Those days had been full of hope and ambition, 2 young idealists ready to take on the world. But life has a way of peeling back the layers of romance to reveal the complicated mess beneath. In many ways, my time in Yorkshire was therapeutic. The open skies and brisk countryside air felt like a reset button for my soul. My consulting work kept me busy, and with each project, I felt more like myself again. There was something deeply satisfying about solving problems for clients and seeing tangible results. It was the kind of fulfillment my personal life had long since ceased to provide. I still thought about Mandy, though less frequently and with fewer pangs of bitterness. Occasionally, I'd catch myself smiling at a memory from our early years together, like when she used to playfully tease me about my love for Yorkshire puddings or how she'd light up a room with her laugh. But those memories were like faint stars on a cloudy night, overshadowed by the weight of betrayal and the inevitable unraveling of our marriage. One Friday evening, I found myself at a local pub, nursing a pint of ale and watching a game on the telly. The pub was alive with chatter, the hum of conversations creating a comforting backdrop. As I sipped my drink, I overheard a couple of blokes at the next table debating the best way to deal with life's disappointments. One of them, an older man with a weathered face, summed it up simply: "You've got to let go of what weighs you down, mate, otherwise it'll drown you." His words stuck with me. Letting go had never been my strong suit. I was a planner, a fixer, someone who thrived on control. But life with Mandy had taught me that some things were beyond my ability to repair. Back at my flat that night, I decided to clear out the last remnants of my old life. There was a box of photographs, letters, and other mementos tucked away in a closet. As I sorted through them, I came across a picture of Mandy and me from our university days. We were at the beach, grinning like fools, arms wrapped around each other. I couldn't help but laugh at how young and clueless we looked. I slipped the photo into a drawer, deciding it deserved a place in my life. Not as a reminder of what was lost, but as a testament to what once was. As for Mandy, I heard through the grapevine that she was still running ABC, though with a significantly reduced workload. Our daughters kept in touch with both of us. And while Lucy sometimes hinted at Mandy's latest actions, I didn't ask for details. I had my own life to live, and she had hers. Ultimately, I came to understand that the best way to move forward was to focus on the road ahead, not the one behind. Life doesn't come with a guide, and often the best you can do is take it one step at a time, trusting that the journey will lead you somewhere worth being.